Welcome to part 3 of this video series where we are reading through and learning how to play Against the Darkmaster. In this video we'll be going into the rules for combat, which I know is everyone's favorite. Alright, combat. So, combat in Against the Darkmaster is very serious and is handled in rounds. And so we have this tactical round sequence here, which also involves its initiative. So let's take a look at how a typical round looks. Okay, the assessment phase. In this phase, characters get their turn at assessing the situation and decide what they want to do in the following phases for the rest of the round, thus declaring their actions. In the assessment phase, each character gets their chance to take a perception skill roll if needed to assess the situation. This roll is not always necessary, but only if the GM deems it appropriate, and specifically when the character has been struck by a critical strike that stunned or knocked them down, has just awakened from sleep or faint in the middle of the action, has been ambushed, has been affected by a disorienting effect such as a fall, tumble, or the like. If the assess roll fails, the character does not get to declare an action in the following action declaration phase for that round. They can still melee in defense, pairing with half their maximum CMB combat something bonus. So here's our tactical round sequence. Assessment phase. Roll perception to assess if needed. Action declaration phase. Declare actions and targets for the current round. Move and maneuver phase. Move up to full move rate or double move rate if sprinting. Perform move skill rolls. Spell phase A. Cast prepared or instant spells. Ranged phase A. Loaded missile and thrown weapon attacks are resolved. Then melee phase. Melee attack phase. Melee attacks are resolved in order of weapon length. Longest weapons, spears and polearms. Long weapons, long swords. And two-handed weapons, short swords. Short weapons, such as maces, hammers, short swords, and hand axes. And then hand weapons, daggers, improvised weapons, and brawling. Ranged phase B. Other missile weapons attacks that weren't fired in ranged phase A are resolved. Spell phase B. Cast unprepared or improvised spells. Other actions phase, other actions take place. Okay, that's a lot, but I think I see where they're going here. So let's go through this as they've got here. So action declaration phase, everybody declares what they're doing. So in general, I'm also a fan of that, because rather than, oh, what are you doing? Okay, now resolve it. Now next person, what are you doing? Now resolve it. And everybody's going to take a lot of time figuring out, oh, it's my turn? Okay, now what do I need to do here? Well, let me think about that and see what I need to do and then resolve it. That here's the time in the action declaration phase. Everybody talk about whatever, figure out what you're doing, and then declare what your action is, and then we're going to resolve that in the following phases. So in general, I do think that's a good way to go and a way that I would like to try. So then move phase. During this phase, characters start moving and performing maneuvers involved in moving and changing position on the battlefield. In case it's necessary to determine which character starts moving earlier, the character capable of moving farther in the single round, or the character with the highest skill bonus for the involved maneuver gets to act first. So first you move after you've declared your actions. Spell phase A. In this phase, the first volley of spells goes off. These fall into two specific categories. Spells that were prepared at least during one of the previous rounds and held until the current round. In this case, the spell gets the bonus penalty for preparing spells according to the number of rounds it was prepared for the casting. Yeah, we saw that in the spell modifiers. And then also instant spells. So that's nice. If you have been preparing spells for a while, then you get to cast yours after everybody moves. I like that. Or these instant spells. And then ranged phase A. Then, in this phase, the first volley of missile weapons shoot. These fall into two specific categories. Loaded and aimed missile weapons, bows and crossbows that have been loaded for a full 1+ rounds before the current one and are thus ready to shoot. Readied thrown weapons, a weapon the character already holds in their hands and is ready to shoot. So I also like that. Like with spells, if you have a ranged weapon and you've been holding it and you've been aiming it over multiple rounds, you get to go first. I like that. Then you go into melee phase. In this phase, combatants that have already closed to each other are at melee range, engage in combat, and exchange blows. The order in which attacks are made is determined by the reach of the combatant's weapons or attack, or the weapon length. There are basically 4 different weapon lengths. Longest, spears and polearms. Long, long swords and two-handed weapons. Short, maces, warhammers, short swords, and hand axes. Hand, daggers, improvised weapons, and brawling. The longer the weapon, the first its turn to attack. The longer the weapon, I guess, it is the first to attack. In the case of a tie between the attacker wielding weapons of the same length, the attacker with the highest CMB goes first. In the case of identical CMB, the attacks are considered simultaneous. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking about that. So I'm not seeing anything about weapon range here. And of course, that's different than weapon length. So I definitely see where they're going here, and I can see why people would like this, but I can definitely see that somebody who is holding a spear or a polearm, for instance, would be able to attack somebody who is holding a dagger, and the person with the dagger would not be able to attack back. So I don't know how tactical we're trying to be here at the moment. And I've read through this initially the first time, and now I'm going through here on the second time with you. So obviously, if, I'm thinking that a spear has a range of, 2 hexes or 3 hexes or something like that. And a dagger, you have to be in the same hex with somebody, or maybe in an adjacent hex in order to attack. You're going to be able to attack with spears, and the person with the dagger is not going to be able to attack you back. But it appears that we're not worried about that here. And then likewise, once the person with the dagger really closes and gets uptight with that person with the spear, the person with the dagger is going to be able to attack, and the person with the spear might not be able to attack at all. But I don't see that going on. In fact, this also does kind of remind me of the One Ring combat that we went over when we were looking at, moving into different zones and things like that. If we were explicitly just talking about different zones, then I could say, okay, here it's, the missile weapons have fired, the spells have fired, and now it's time for everybody who is declared to be within melee range, and so we're going to resolve them in this different order. But if you're being more tactical than that, then I think that the length of the weapon doesn't have to do with who gets to attack. It probably would have to do with who gets to attack in the first round. The guy with the dagger is charging the guy with the spear. The guy with the spear gets to attack first, and second, maybe trying to retreat to give ground to make sure there's enough space between the guy with the dagger, between him and the guy with the dagger to make sure the spear can attack. But then, boy, once the guy with the dagger gets in close, the guy with the spear may be basically unable to make an attack as the guy with the dagger jumps on top of him and starts to pummel him. But I don't see anything like that in here. We do have positional bonus. A positional bonus is a circumstance in which one attacker has an advantage, attacking from higher ground or being horse-mounted, flanking a foe, attacking from the rear of a foe. And so an attacker with a positional bonus is considered as wielding a weapon 1 step longer than its actual length. So that's not actually a bonus to your roll, so that's interesting. You're instead moving up and being able to attack faster. Thus, a longsword becomes longest, and a hand axe becomes long for the purposes of determining who gets to attack first in melee. And then there was also this thing called a dashing attack, which is far, if you were looking at elegance in rules, this seems to be an exception that's thrown out there. So what is a dashing attack? A dashing attack is an audacious and daring attempt at lunging at the opponent, trying to take them off with a single surprise blow. A dashing attack gets a special 30 CMB, but the attacker is considered as wielding a weapon 1 step longer than its actual length for the purposes of determining which combatant gets to strike first in the melee. A character who decides to make a dashing attack action cannot parry in the same round. They must commit all to their CMB attack. So it's like all-out attack or something like that. After this, we've got ranged phase B. In this phase, the second volley of missile weapons shoot. This will be all of the missile and thrown weapons that hadn't already been fired in phase 1, ranged phase A, or missile weapons reloaded in the same round with a reload action. And then spell phase B. In this phase, the second round of spells goes off. These will be unprepared spells, spells cast without preparation, taking the maximum penalty for a 0-round prep casting. Then any other actions that you've got to do. So then we've got types of actions, and we have full round actions, half round actions, and free actions. So full round actions, making a melee or ranged attack, casting a non-instantaneous spell, moving at full speed while sprinting. Half actions, readying an item or drawing a weapon, casting an instantaneous spell. So it's interesting that casting an instantaneous spell is a half action. Knocking an arrow and taking aim. Moving to engage a foe in melee. Free actions include talking, singing, chanting, making an assessment or perception roll, declaring actions. And then you get to combine these in different ways. So you can combine one full action and a free action, or one full round action and a half action, both at -20, or two half actions with no penalty and a free action. I can see that people might have a time with that at the table. We do have this other option for readied actions. Readied actions are those actions that a character voluntarily holds and releases only when a specific circumstances arises. If they want to ready an action, it does not take place immediately in the phase in which the character should have taken it, but can be delayed indefinitely until the character wants it to go off. At that point, it takes place any time in any phase and interrupts the actions in order of resolution. Okay. Now we have an action summary table of all of our different potential combinations of actions. There are multi-round actions, and now we do talk about maneuvering around the battlefield and how far people can move. But here is finally how to make an attack. To make an attack, a character rolls D100 open-ended and adds their combat bonus to the roll and any other applicable modifier. We figured that's how it was go. Then they must subtract the target's defensive bonus from the roll, and that is the attack roll. The final score of the attack roll is then cross-referenced with the appropriate attack table for the weapon, spell, or other form of attack the character is using to perform their attack action, and the armor type of the target's wearing. Two important things to remember. An attack is a full round action. To make an attack, a character must have at least a +0 or higher combat bonus remaining. If any effect or modifiers lower the combat bonus of the character under +0, they cannot make an attack. Okay, so where are we going to get to the tables here? Because here we have information on reading the attack rolls. Let's wait to that until we see the table. We do have information on the range. The distance from which missile and thrown weapons can make an attack against a target is determined by their base range value, shown under each weapon description in the weapon table. This value is used to determine if the ranged attack suffers a penalty. So attacks made by a character against a target within the base range of the weapon suffers no penalty. Attacks against the target between the base range and double its base range are medium range attacks and occur a -25 penalty. Oh, and then we keep going from there. So, there's some parts of me do appreciate the simplicity of short range and long range. Pick one. But yes, from a lot of games earlier that I played, you've got short range, medium range, long range, maximum possible range, and things like that. So it looks like we have that here. Target between 3 and 4 times the weapon's base range are said to be at extreme range, and that's at -75. Okay. We've got parrying, which seems to be very much like it's done in MERP. You can choose to subtract some amount of your combat bonus and add it to your defensive bonus if you're trying to protect yourself against incoming attacks. Plus, we have special rules for that as well. Then we do get over here to critical strikes. Okay, so here I was talking about we have different descriptive levels of critical strikes rather than just A, B, C, D, E, F or something like that we had in MERP. We have superficial, light, moderate, grievous, and lethal. I think that probably A, B, C, D, E, F are probably faster and more easily, immediately understood. Obviously, people understand what a moderate critical is, but they don't understand what a moderate critical is in relation to everything else. But if you tell people we got criticals A through F, A is the worst and F is the best, or whichever way it went, and then you're along that continuum. Here, it's a little bit less intuitive to understand where you stand along that continuum, but once you tell somebody, superficial critical, okay, superficial, light critical, moderate critical, grievous critical, and then lethal, and then that level of critical adds to what I think is going to become a critical roll. So superficial, light is modified by +10, all the way down to lethal, which is modified by +50, and there is a separate table for critical strikes, as well as weapon fumbles. We have something called the clumsy range instead of the fumble range. I think I like fumble better, but okay, we call it the clumsy range of the weapon. If you roll within the clumsy range of the weapon, the attack automatically misses, and the character has fumbled their weapon or attack. Roll another D100, not open-ended. Okay, you have to remember what's open-ended and what's not. That's not open-ended. Was the critical roll open-ended? Yep, the critical roll is open-ended. Weapon fumbles are not open-ended. I guess it's just something you have to remember. Here is our fumble table for melee and thrown weapons versus missile weapons. And you will note that in this game, they are not as colorful as they were in MERP. So we had a lot of, colorful things that we were laughing at and joking at when we went over the MERP game. Well, we don't have that in Against the Darkmaster. They're much more straightforward here. So, for instance, here, the character is stunned and gets to choose two, drops their weapon, takes a light critical strike of the appropriate type on himself, inflicts a light critical strike upon a nearby ally, or the weapon breaks. That is faster, and I probably like that a bit better, rather than having all of the colorful and sometimes not necessarily genre-appropriate things that were in MERP. Oh, we do have combat conditions here. What happens if they're prone, surprised, stunned, flanking, incapacitated, held? Okay, that's good. And then damage, wounds, and healing. Okay, I was expecting some attack tables, but I guess we will get to those. So hit points, we're basically working in a hit point system. We've got total hit points. If a character's hit points drop to 0 or less, they pass out and become incapacitated. If their current HP falls to negative 50 or less, a character starts dying in 6 rounds unless they are healed somehow. Bruised value. A character's bruised value is equal to half their total hit points. Should a character's current hit points fall under the bruised value, they will suffer from a negative 20 penalty to all their action and attack rolls. When a character rests, they recover 1/10 of their total HPs rounded down every hour of rest, although herbs and magical healing can increase their amount recovered. But you can also start bleeding, and as you can imagine, that's bad. Bleeding is cumulative, and there are 3 severities of bleeding based on the total amount of HPs lost by the characters each round. A character losing 1 to 4 HPs each round is suffering from light bleeding. Characters suffering 5 to 10 HPs are suffering from severe bleeding. Finally, those losing more than 10 HPs a round suffer from exsanguination and are considered to be dying. That's bad. In a number of rounds equal to 20 minus their bleeding value down to a minimum of 1 round. Bleeding characters cannot recover HPs until their wound is treated and blood loss is healed. Outside of combat, bleeding can be temporarily stopped simply by applying some bandages or a tourniquet. However, unless successfully treated, bleeding will resume as soon as they enter combat again or perform some strenuous activity. Ugh. Characters suffering from exsanguination are automatically weary as well. Dying, weary, injuries. So this is where I was talking about, well, I suppose if this kind of thing happened to you as the result of combat, you would know if you had suffered some kind of major wound, because obviously that people are going to be talking about this kind of thing if it happened to you, and you're probably going to remember as far as getting HPs, or getting experience points go. We've got different severity levels of injuries, and we do cover death and dismemberment, poison and disease, falling damage. Well, that's good. And then we move on to spells. But I was really looking for, let's see if we can scroll down and see some combat tables before we move on. I was kind of disappointed I didn't see those. Okay, here we do have weapons table. We have a weapon, the number of hands it takes, the skill used to wield it. What is CR? Let's see if we can find things down here. CR, the range at which the attacker fumbles the weapon when attacking. Why is CR the fumble range? You would think that'd be FR. If the natural D100 attack roll falls into this range, the attack automatically misses, and the attacker must roll on the weapon fumble table. So that's fumble range. Why is it CR? Length, that's important for when you're going to go in combat. Attack table, edged, blunt, unarmed, okay. Max res, what is that? Max res is the maximum result that the unmodified attack roll can get on the attack table. Higher results than this cap can't be obtained by this weapon. Oh, I can see that being something that people miss all the time. Generally, the heavier the weapon, the highest results it can get on the attack table, the more potential damage it can inflict on the target. Okay. Yeah, I can tell people will miss that. So certain weapons, I can see what they're trying to do here. So if you've got this attack table for instance, blunt weapons, here is the ball and chain, and here is the club. So both of them are blunt weapons. The ball and chain has a higher fumble range than the club does, but the ball and chain can potentially get a higher result on the attack table than the club can, because the club maxes out at 110, the ball and chain doesn't max out until 150. I can still see that being things that people will have to remember to remember. Primary critical, what type of critical damage does it do? Cut, impact, pierce, grapple, okay. Base range, that was, okay, like heavy crossbow, that has a particular range right there. And then notes. The ball and chain, if fumbled, the attacker also takes a light impact critical on himself. Okay, so then different notes. So that's the weapons table. General gear, that's our fare, which allows us to figure out whether or not we can buy it. And our availability over here, okay. Item quality modifiers, food, drink, and lodging, mounts and animals, transportation. Armors table, okay, that's something interesting to think about too, because I believe that this game, much like MERP, which we talked about kind of liking in MERP, or I kind of liked in MERP, had different categories of armor. We have different types of armor you can buy, but we also kind of lump them into different categories when we're talking about weapon versus armor type. And we also talked about that when I was doing the realism in RPG combat videos, that could be a potential way to go that gets some crunch in there that we want, but isn't too crunchy and overwhelming. So I think this, following from MERP, says that, okay, a leather jerkin is light armor. Reinforced leather is light armor. Chainmail is medium armor. Mail is medium armor, the way I say it. Half plate is heavy, and so forth. Oh, and we do have to look at, so what is this? Maximum. Oh, but we do have to remember that armor was different from encumbrance in this game. So that's possibly one of those holdovers that is inelegant here. So if you're wearing this type of armor right here, this is maximum, that's your swiftness score that can be added to your defense, your move action penalty, your combat action penalty, is that perception penalty? Move defensive bonus, missile defensive bonus. So we also have zones protected. So zones protected, the body parts zones actually protected by the armor worn. Some critical strikes may read differently if a specific body part is hit, whether or not it's covered by armor. Use this information to discern the case. So max SWI to def, do def to def, maximum swiftness bonus applicable to defense when wearing said armor, movement penalty, penalty to moving actions and some other actions. Generally, this penalty is applied to athletics, acrobatics, ride, stealth. It can be offset partially or wholly by the armor skill bonus to a maximum of 0. The total penalty may be stacked. For example, wearing a chainmail armor and holding a wall shield will result in a total movement penalty of negative 65. CMB penalty to the combat bonus when wearing said armor, perception penalty to the perception skill when wearing said armor, melee defense bonus, straight bonus to the defense against a melee attack when wearing hilding said piece of armor, straight bonus to the defense against ranged attacks when wearing hilding said piece of armor. So this does strike me as a lot. It is the kind of thing that I would have really loved years and years and years ago, especially when I was learning MERP, and if you had said, here, play this instead, here's a little bit of a simplification of MERP, a little bit more streamlined, which I definitely think it is, but we still have a bunch of this different stuff. I would have loved it, but I think that in today's world, when you're trying to get players together, in most people's circumstances, this is going to be too much to try to deal with. That's at least my initial kind of opinion here, looking at it. Again, personally, I love detail and complexity. I came out of that kind of gaming. I've kind of moved away from it now, so I definitely understand why it is appealing. But as far as if I'm going to be able to get together people, I think this is probably not what I would try to do. I think that goes to a level where I would try to simplify it. Combat modifiers summary table. Okay. This is all of your prone, surprised, weary, held, all of that. And here's your modifier to that. Fighting on rough terrain, fighting on arduous terrain. Combatant is lightly encumbered. Combatant is encumbered. Which does not have to do with your armor, by the way. Your armor is separate to that. Creatures stat table. Okay, that's like your bestiary. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, finally, here are attack tables. Okay, so here is your edged weapon attack table. So, okay, this is kind of like what I thought we were going to. So we've got a roll of the die, which you have rolled, you have added your skill to, you have added all possible modifiers to, and then you have subtracted the target's defense, and then you look up here at whether or not they are wearing no armor, light armor, medium armor, or heavy armor, which are reasonable categories. I think MERP did have, are they wearing chain, for instance, or are they wearing plate, or are they wearing leather? This time we were just going to light, medium, or heavy, and I think I did talk about that as well in the Realism and RPG Combat series of videos where I was talking about, should we be talking about light, heavy, or medium, or should we be talking about particular materials of armor? And I think we talked about both of those. So in this case, we are going light, medium, and heavy, or none. I don't know why it says NA, but maybe that's supposed to be none. I think I would put none there. But then also we have to remember that in some cases particular armor types will give you particular bonuses to melee defense or missile defense. To me, that's an overlap. And then we have the non-hits. So it said that anything that has the dash in it is not a hit. It did say that in reading this table, the zeros mean that you did actually contact your target, but you didn't do enough damage to inflict even a hit point of damage. So that's interesting because I think that we have talked about in other videos that sometimes it's important to know whether or not you are able to physically contact your opponent or not, regardless of whether or not you actually did damage. And I think in other videos I even talked about how we used to adjudicate that system when I was playing AD&D to determine hits, whether or not you missed the target completely or whether or not you hit them but just didn't cause damage. So this actually makes that explicit, and I do like that because there are situations where that could matter. So here you have made some type of physical contact, but you are still at 0 damage. And then here is the amount of hit points that you inflict, and then this is starting to tell you the critical damage. So that's soup was superficial, and then light criticals, and moderate criticals, and then grievous criticals, and then lethal criticals, and we keep going up. But then you also have to remember that this is edged weapons that we're looking at right now, but not all edged weapons can go up to certain levels. Sometimes certain edged weapons will be capped at a certain result on this table, because they aren't as lethal as other weapons. Again, there was a time in my life when I completely would have loved every bit of this. And I still really do love it, and I appreciate it, and I do think it would be fun. I wish I could get some people together who would appreciate playing this kind of thing and seeing what it's like. But I don't think for general gaming, for the people who I'm able to get together today, that if we're going to be doing some role-playing, I don't think most of them would appreciate pulling out this table. A couple would maybe, but for the most part, and it's not just pulling out this table, of course. You're also pulling out the blunt weapons attack table, and the missile weapons attack table, and the unarmed grappling attack table, and the area spells attack table, and bolt spells attack table. Okay, but that's all of them, which is a further simplification from MERP. So I do appreciate the simplification and the streamlining, because when I'm thinking about these things, I do know there's a lot more detail and a lot more tables in MERP, and I do remember there being even more tables and detail in Rolemaster. But when I'm trying to think about this, I'm thinking about the amount of complexity that I'm adding to the table versus the amount of fun and enjoyment that I'm adding to the table. And if the number of tables, different kinds of tables here, gaming table versus table in the rulebook. And if the more tables in the rule book that I am adding and that we are trying to reference, it isn't actually increasing fun at some type of rate greater than that, then probably it is time to simplify. That's my current thinking on it. But I do appreciate what they're doing here. So let's go back up to reading the attack table results. The results on the attack table, now that we've seen an attack table, if the final modified attack roll results into the up to 10 range, the attack automatically misses. Also, it's possible you're in the clumsy range or the fumble range of the weapon, and in case you will fumble. If the modified attack roll results in that dash, the attacker has missed its target, no harm is inflicted. If the modified attack roll results in a 0, the attack hits its target but deals no damage. If the result of the modified attack roll is a number different from 0, that is the number of hit points inflicted, and those are subtracted from the current hit points. If the result of the attack roll modifier is a number and an acronym, that is the base damage as well as the critical that is dealt to the foe. So I think we got that. So that is how it goes. Alright, that's the end of the section on combat in Against the Darkmaster. In the next video, we'll go into the rules for spells and criticals, which are always fun. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and all that jazz, but also please check out my YouTube channel. I already have over 100 videos on that channel about tabletop games and fantasy, and if you enjoyed this video, you will likely enjoy many of the other videos on that channel as well. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in many more videos to come. Later!